Welcome to Grant's Rock Warehouse. Tonight I want to welcome to the show Alec Wightman. He is the author of the book, Music in My Life. He's here for an interview and discussion. This is incredible. If you're a music fan, this is a must. So let's
Talking
go.
bands no one talks about. Grant's Rock Warehouse.
Welcome to Grant's Rock Warehouse, and tonight I want to welcome Alec Wightman to the show. He is the author of Music in My Life, Notes from a Longtime Fan. We're going to have a music discussion. We're going to talk about his life. We're going to talk about concerts. We're going to talk about bands. He's went to tons of live shows. He started a production company, Zeppelin Productions, where he puts on shows here in Columbus, Ohio. That's still going strong. He's a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame board, for crying out loud. He's just an inspiration. This is a great read. We're going to touch on his book, but I want to welcome Alec to the show. Alec, how are you? Nice to see you. You ready to talk some music?
I'm always ready to talk music. It's great to
Good.
be.
The thing about my channel, if you don't know, we like to talk about bands and artists no one really talks about. The whole thing I want to do is turn people on to music. That is all I want to do. Similar to you with Zeppelin Productions, you want to turn a lot of these people onto these acts that you promote. I totally get it. But music, it makes the world go around, and it's very, what can I say? It's just, it runs deep in the warehouse. That's what I'm going to say. But you've had quite a life too. And this book documents that. I can't believe that you've gotten so much information within the pages of this book. And so, how many pages? Like 300 and what?
I don't have it open in front of me, but it's, 300, 3.25 something.
It's amazing. It's a good read. It goes quickly. It's wonderful. But there are certain things. I have a whole list of things I want to talk to you about. Now, you first heard Dion, the Wanderer, when you were 10 years old, correct? And that song changed your life. Am I right or wrong?
You are absolutely right.
I had a similar experience. And for some reason, when you're 10 years old, everything's still shiny and new. When you hear things, you just take everything in. What happened when you heard Dion, the Wanderer? What happened? Set that up, because I'd love for people to hear it, because I have a similar story that I've talked about on my channel before. But you're 10 years old, you hear this song. Set it up for us.
Well, I was in sixth grade. I had skipped a grade. So I was in sixth grade. I was 10 years old. And, I'd heard a little bit of rock and roll, I suppose, as a very young kid. But it hadn't caught my ear. But transistor radios were out. And, I was laying in bed listening to the Cleveland Indians late at night and learning that there was a world out there. And at some point, I stumbled into WHK radio and AM radio in Cleveland, Ohio, and began to listen to rock and roll. And December of 1961, I heard The Wanderer on the radio. And I can't tell you why a then 20-some-year-old Italian American kid from the Bronx singing about what that song is about, based, I believe, on Jimmy Reed blues chords, spoke to a little kid in Cleveland, Ohio, but it did. And I loved the song. I began to read a little bit about Dion, listen to other music. One of the things that early on impacted me was learning that he wrote his own songs, which not everybody did in those days. A few people did, but not many. And I became a fan not only of Dion, but of rock and roll, Jim.
But when you heard that song, what prior to that had you heard? Because, I'd heard my folks, it's a similar kind of thing. My folks, like Benny Goodman, they grew up in the 40s, okay? Like big bands, like Benny Goodman. They love Lawrence Welk. We always have to watch Lawrence Welk on Sunday. That was what they liked. Now, when I grew up, that's what I heard. And none of that really struck me. When you were like a kid before that, what was there anything Dion evidently really hit it out of the park. Did the Skies part, you know what I mean? You hear that track and it just grabs you.
let me think about that for a second. There wasn't a lot of music around our house. My father was born in Scotland,
Hmm.
and so there was a heritage of Scottish music. He loved a Scottish tenor named Kenneth McKellar. We had those albums in the house. My parents played show tunes,
Hmm.
so South Pacific and those kinds of things were played, but none of them meant a lot to me. Um, yeah, my recollection, I'd have to go back and look at the dates, but before The Wanderer, as I was stumbling in, rock and roll took a real dive. 1960 and for a couple of years thereafter. Elvis went into the army, and Chuck Berry
Fabian.
went to jail, and Little Richard went into the ministry. Jerry Lee Lewis married his 13-year-old cousin and was blackballed from all kinds of things. And so the music I was hearing was things like, Moon River and, Ferrani and Teicher, songs from West Side Story. And so there was something about hearing The Wanderer that stood out at that very point in time. And I do recall now that, being smitten by that, my mother went out and bought, she went to Demshar's record store in Euclid, Ohio, and asked for recommendations on records she could buy me for Christmas. And one of the things they sold her was Dion and the Belmonts' greatest hits. So Dion had left the Belmonts by that point. He was out as a solo artist. But I put that album on, and this guy who had spoken to me over the radio suddenly was in my house with a dozen fabulous songs going back to the Belmonts days. And, I was off to the races.
Yeah. But it's just one of those moments. And I'm going to tell you my moment just because we're talking music. So
Sure.
I was 10. I was at the neighbor's house. I've told this on my channel, but people can listen to it again. I don't care because I remember it like it was yesterday. Moments when you're at this age, it makes big impacts. So I loved records. I had, a record player. I had this Decca record player my parents bought me. So, I was born in 65. This is like 75 when I was 10. So I got turned on to it. I had this Decca record player with tubes, and it was checkerboard, and you could open it up and had a big old arm on it, heavy. It had reverb on it. It's what I used to play records on. And I just would sit there for hours, Alec, and play. All I did was play records all the time. I had it bad, and I still have it bad. So anyway, I was over at the neighbor's house, and I was going through their 45s, and I stumbled across the records She Loves You and I Want to Hold Your Hand picture sleeves on the Capitol ones. And I'm looking at them going, wow, look, these guys look cool. Never heard the Beatles. This is 5 years after they broke up. I'd never heard of them. My parents didn't talk about it. They never played it. But I thought these guys on the picture sleeve looked really cool. So I said, can I borrow these? And they let me borrow them. I took them home on my Decca record player and fired it up. And I heard, I Want to Hold Your Hand. And I thought I had just been struck by lightning. I had never heard anything quite like it in my life. I'd never heard any pop music or anything up until that moment. That was my gateway drug, and I played She Loves You. I played the flip sides. I had never heard anything like it. It was a come to Jesus moment for me. And right then I was hooked. I was trying to get anything I could possibly get, anything that I could possibly take in and listen to. I mean, after you had that Dion experience, I mean, were you just like trying to look for anything you could look for that was even related to that? Or how did you? I mean, I remember listen to this. I begged my folks. I said, I have to get a Beatles record. I have to. Please, I need money. I rode my bike down to Kresge's in downtown Marion and went there, and they had the Beatles 62 to 66. And they gave me enough money to buy that record. I rode my bike back home and just played it over and over again. I was just hooked.
Well,
So luckily, but
you're just a kid, Grant. You should have been there a decade earlier.
well, this is why I'm envious. This is what you should see what I want to ask you about.
I remember 61, 62, 63. Again, the rock and, the Stripper by David Rose, an instrumental. I mean, the songs that were making it to the tops of the charts were not rock and roll. There were exceptions to that, but it was a real down period. But I was there. I was listening. I was on the radio or listening on the radio. At that Demshar's record store, they sold Billboard magazine. I began to buy Billboard and look at the charts. I would make my own chart every week of what were, my top 10 or 25 or whatever I did.
Mhm.
And, I was having fun with it. But, it's just 60 years ago this week, February 9, that the Beatles made their debut appearance at Ed Sullivan. And I went
Mhm.
upstairs in my parents' bedroom on their little black and white portable they had. I'm quite confident we didn't have a color TV downstairs either, but this was a little black and white TV. And I sat there and watched the Beatles in many ways, give us back our music from the late 50s with a little different spin as it evolved. The British invasion was in many ways giving us back our music from 5, 6, 8 years earlier.
Mhm.
Although it's interesting, people might not remember that night this tells you where music was at the time. The Beatles on Ed Sullivan did, those songs you've just mentioned. Paul also sang "Till There Was You" from The Music Man. I mean, the concept that the Beatles would go on Ed Sullivan and sing a show tune, an American show tune, is kind of strange, but he did. And I, like millions of other young people in the United States, saw that show and their subsequent appearances, and our lives changed.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I It's just amazing how everything and don't you think everything virtually changed overnight after that?
In many ways it did. Their popularity caused the record companies to aggressively begin to not only, bring the other British acts over, the Stones, the Kinks, the Yardbirds, always my favorite, Eric Burton and the Animals. But the American, the record companies began to find American bands and try to posture them as Brits. The Beau Brummels out of San Francisco. The fact that the Sir Douglas Quintet, which Tex-Mex guys from San Antonio or whatever, got
Mhm.
postured as as British acts, and the music got better overnight. Rock and roll was back in its truest sense, and
Funny you should mention Sir Douglas Quintet because I remember, God, I haven't thought about this in years, but I'm going to be thinking a lot of stuff talking to you today. They played at Stashes, I believe, like in the 80s. Um, I think they were billed as Sir Douglas Quintet.
Well, Doug Sam, is still a legend.
Yeah.
The late Doug Sam among the rockers, and it doesn't surprise me. I don't know whether I was a regular at Stashes, but I went there lots and lots and lots, and I don't remember them being there. But
It was Doug and Augie,
well,
I
there
think
you
was
go.
it.
Yeah,
And Augie was still playing his Vox Continental organ. So
sure,
it still sounded like, I mean, if you have those two guys, you're pretty much Sir Douglas Quintet.
absolutely.
But I always thought it was kind of odd that they billed themselves that way. It was a buddy and I went and saw him there. And there was hardly any, it was so, well, you've been to Stashes. It's very intimate, but man, there was a lot of great acts. See, we're going to go on a lot of tangents tonight, ladies and gentlemen, so bear with us. Um, but there was a lot of great acts that went through Stashes. That place is highly missed, you know?
Yes, yes. Dan Dugan, who owned it, and subsequently Little Brothers, had great musical taste. And
Mhm.
Kurt Schieber brought a lot of those shows as a promoter, kind of like I do with Zeppelin Productions. Only he was actually trying to make money, which is hard to do. I never gave up the day job, so my goal in promoting shows is trying not to lose too much money.
That's a good goal. A good goal.
Makes it easier.
So let's see. So we talked about Beatles on Sullivan. The other thing that I got out of your book that, I mean, I love the history part of it is in 67, you heard the Buffalo Springfield,
Yes.
and that had a big impact on you.
Yep. To this day, I would say that there's nobody that I would pay more to see, drive farther to see, or have seen more often than Neil Young. And of course, he came out of that band, as did Steve Stills, Richie
Richie
Furay,
Furay, yeah.
in its later incarnations, Jim Messina. I mean, there's, all kinds of folks that came out of there, but, really it was Steve and Richie and Neil.
Mm-hmm.
Two of whom I've had, the pleasure of, well, I haven't met Neil. We can talk about that later. I have met Richie, but I've been around Neil a bunch, and he doesn't always speak to me, but when he does, to me, there's nobody better.
Yeah. Well, you go into it in the book that you're a big Neil Young fan.
No question.
I mean, talk about an artist that is so prolific even now.
Even now.
I mean, what's he putting out 2 records a year still, pretty much? I mean, you have to admire that.
Yeah.
Maybe not everything hits it out of the park, but There's great, Neil's just, what can I say?
Yep.
Prolific. That's what he is. But what was it like when you heard the Springfield the first time? What was it? What was it about the Springfield? Was it Neil? Was it Stephen Stills? I mean, just was it the
Oh,
production? What
it
was it about it?
it was all three of them because they all, Richie did a lot of the lead vocals, certainly on the songs that Neil had written. Um, I still remember buying that first album, and a friend bought the same album the same day. We took them back to my house to play, and we looked at the album covers, and my album had For What It's Worth, which was at that point already a hit single,
Mhm.
as the first song on the first side, and his album had something else. I only later learned that that album had been released by Atco or whoever, I think it was on Atco,
Yeah, Atco.
um, in the late fall of '66. And then Stills wrote For What It's Worth. They'd get it played as a single on the West Coast. It caught fire. They went back and reproduced the album, took a song off and put that back out. That was a little bit of an eye opener that those kinds of things happen. But that the Springfield just had such a combination of melody and fascinating lyrics. Obviously, two great guitar players, unique and different voices. Neil's certainly, and I don't know. It was a great band. That second album, Buffalo Springfield Again,
Hmm.
it would still be pretty close to a desert island album for me. Um, but all three of the albums they put out were great records.
For What It's Worth was how big of a hit? Was that a pretty big hit? Because
Yeah,
back in those days, we had a lot of regional hits and stuff. So you were still up in Cleveland then, but that was a pretty big hit in that up in Cleveland and
yes.
Ohio. Okay.
I think For What It's Worth was a national hit by the time I would have bought that album in February or whatever of 1967.
I think it's a great track, but I just think it's interesting how music was during that era. Because if you look at the Buffalo Springfield, I wouldn't think of, as them as being a very commercial outfit compared to what was on AM radio or, the top 40 at the time, How did you, I know Rolling Stone came out in 67. How did you learn about all these bands? Like you mentioned, um, Al Cooper, Blood, Sweat and Tears, Traffic, Michael Bloomfield. How did you learn about all these bands? I mean, was it from the radio? Was it from publications? Was it from Rolling Stone? How did you, even when you were like younger, like in 66, 65, was it just from the radio? Because I don't know what kind of publications were out then and how one would really learn about stuff. Because Rolling Stone, as far as I know, what else was there? A magazine called Cheetah. I don't know. How did people really learn about these bands, these up and coming bands?
Well, that's a great question. Rolling Stone started in November, October, November of '67. My mother, let me back all the way up. AM radio, certainly. I mean, there
Okay.
was rock and roll on the AM radio. Um, I did buy somewhat regularly Billboard magazine. Now it was a trade publication. It wasn't really catering to the 13-year-old kid in Cleveland, Ohio, but it had its charts. You could see who had bullets, who was moving, and I could tell what was getting played on radio around the country. There were a handful of wonderful record stores in the greater Cleveland area, Record Rendezvous being the famous one. They had 2 or 3 locations, and you'd go into those stores and those people were informed. And in those days, you could take an album, listen to it in a booth. They played them in the store. And so you could pick that up. One of the things I started to do early on, believe it or not, was I would read the liner notes, and I saw who wrote the songs. I saw who produced the albums. I saw who who was playing on the albums, and that would lead me from one to another in many instances. By '67, I would think a couple of the local colleges had very low wattage FM stations that were beginning. Case had one, John Carroll had one. I could get those in Euclid, Ohio. So I was hearing. Now they were starting to play the Blues Project. Who'd come to play at Kent State or at the little club La Cave in Cleveland. So I was starting to get educated. A record store opened in downtown Cleveland called the Music Grotto. And that guy who ran that was way on the cutting edge. So, going in there and buying Cream and Jimi Hendrix and, that first Traffic album, Blood, Sweat and Tears, Electric Flag. I bought a Rolling Stone off of a rack there, their first issue, brought it home. My mother, saw me fascinated by it. Thankfully, she didn't look at it too close, but she took a little clipping off the back page and sent it in and got me a subscription for Christmas 1967. I remain a subscriber to this day. And when that thing would show up, I would read it cover to cover. And now we're into, my senior year in high school. It's a little bit later, but
I think that perfectly sums it up. I always wondered, like, if you look at an album, Freak Out by Frank Zappa, came out in 1966.
Yeah.
Absolutely no commercial potential. How would any kid ever hear it unless maybe you go to a record store? Maybe they would take a chance and stock it. And, you would look at it. 1966, you look at that crazy cover.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like something that's from outer space. Look what landed here. And you might look at the cover and go, wow, this is cool looking. But you know what I mean? I guess you just have to, I guess you would just have to hope that these record stores and these record store owners would just be hip enough that could take a chance and throw these records out there during that era.
And some of them were. And there was word of mouth. I mean, I had a graduating class of 1,027 in high school. I can assure you in that mix of 1,027 kids, there were a bunch of people who were really into music.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about it. And, so, there was word of mouth. Today you've got social media. Back then you actually had to talk to people.
But I just wonder if you would like categorize some of this stuff, like if you would look at Traffic or maybe Zappa or, I don't know, even Buffalo Springfield, because I don't think they're the most commercial thing out there. You'd almost have to, I would look at it as being like alternative music, like in the 90s to some degree.
I think in the late 60s, I called that progressive rock. It was the stuff that was played on the FM radio on the college stations.
Mm-hmm.
WMMS was at the forefront of this. By the time you were a kid, it was the station in Cleveland. But I remember when Billy Bass was a disc jockey on MMS in the late 60s, and he was playing stuff you did not hear on AM radio, and he was playing album cuts. He wasn't just playing singles off, that the record company said this is what we're going to release as a single. He was playing 3 or 4 songs off an album. The world did change.
Oh, it changed. But so after Rolling Stone came out, that's really, you learned a lot about artists from that, because they would review a lot of stuff. I'm sure that really was a big game changer for you.
Yeah, and back in those days, they actually reviewed them, and some of the reviews weren't always fair, but everything didn't get 3.5 stars. They gave a handful of records 5 stars. They gave some 1.
Mm-hmm.
They had wonderful writers for Rolling Stone in the early days that brought musical knowledge and insight to bear. And every time one of those issues hit the mailbox, I read it cover to cover.
So I'm just curious, what other things in that era? Buffalo Springfield were big. What else? I know we're spending a lot of time with this, but this is what I dig this stuff. And I love picking your brain about it. What other bands from this era, when you heard them, really had an impact on you from the 60s or, early 70s?
Well, I mentioned earlier, kind of going back a step or two, I was a huge Eric Burton and the Animals fan.
Mm-hmm.
I just thought they brought an edge to bear. Not that the Stones or the Kinks, the Yardbirds did as well, but there was something about the Animals that just spoke to me. I did begin to move probably early on. Buffalo Springfield was a forerunner of the kind of singer-songwriter music that I loved so well, by the early and mid 70s. I was right there for the breaking of the psychedelic music, the 67, 68, 69. I had Fresh Cream, that first Cream album, when nobody else had it. The second album came, Disraeli Gears, with Sunshine of Your Love, Hendrix's first record, which, spun off Foxy Lady and Fire and, Purple Haze, all those great songs. I talk in the book about a day in the spring of 1968. I went down to Music Grotto with a bunch of buddies, a little record store down by the Cleveland State. And the guy who ran the store said that just last week, Jimi Hendrix, who had been playing in Cleveland, was in this store, and he told me this album is the best album out there. And it was the first Traffic album, at least the first Traffic album in the US, the Dear Mr. Fantasy record. And I bought that. I bought the album that, well, I bought Electric Flag, great record. I'm a huge fan of Mike Bloomfield. But the album that really struck me was that first Blood, Sweat and Tears album, Childless Father to the Man. I mean, today would still say that's one of the, best albums of all time. That, before David Clayton Thomas had joined the band, this was Al Cooper's band. So, that whole era certainly hit me as well.
Yeah, funny you should mention that. I found now we're talking records, but I found a Mobile Fidelity gold CD of that, not like maybe a couple months ago, and I picked it up.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I had never heard that first Blood, Sweat and Tears album. Very familiar with the second one.
Yeah.
But I know they're two different animals pretty much. Yeah. But I hadn't heard that first one.
I took that first album off to Duke in the fall of 1968 and played it for people in the dorm. And I think they really liked it. Maybe it didn't strike. You had to listen to that one a little bit. And Cooper didn't, he certainly wasn't Pavarotti. He didn't have the best voice, but I just thought that album was fabulous. And I came home at Thanksgiving of my freshman year. So this would have been 68. And there was a little ad in the Cleveland Plain Dealer that Blood, Sweat and Tears was playing at the WHK Auditorium. And I got a buddy and we went down thinking I was going to see, the Al Cooper and the band that had made this record that had been nonstop on my turntable for 6 months. And so we got down there, and the first thing is they had an opening act, and it was the Stooges from Detroit, and with Iggy Pop. And I mean, I had no idea who they were, and I certainly had no idea what they were doing. Iggy would stand on the stage and fall flat on his face with the microphone, and there's stories in the book about the show. But so they get off the stage, and they take a break, and the curtains close, and then they open it up, and I think I'm going to see a bunch of hippie types with Al Cooper leading Blood, Sweat and Tears, and it's these guys in suits and ties all dressed up.
Totally different.
David Clayton Thomas is the singer, and it is my recollection the album had not come out yet, that second album that made them stars. And here was this, they were wonderful, but it was very polished, it was very different. And I went back to Duke, and within weeks, early in 1969, that album came out and went right to the top of the charts and spun off all kinds of hit singles. All my guys thought I was a genius because I'd known the band a year earlier, except it really wasn't different.
It's a totally different band, pretty much. Yeah. Well, what was it like? Well, you had to be blown away by Iggy Pop. Or there's not many performers during that era that was quite like that. I would imagine you were probably sitting there going, "What am I watching?"
Well, and there is a story in the book at a point in time, and there was hardly anybody in the theater. I mean, nobody knew who Blood, Sweat and Tears was. Again, they were just riding off that first album, which had no commercial success at all. And at one point, Iggy crawled across the stage, crawled down the stair. He's crawling and crawled across the front and started crawling up the aisle. And there was a girl, sitting, 2 rows behind me and across the aisle. And it suddenly became clear that Iggy was coming for her. And she got up and screamed and ran out of the place. I mean, this was not a kind of rock and roll I do.
That's
and
amazing.
They opened for Blood, Sweat and Tears, all polished, almost in tuxedos. So
I can't remember. Did you ever get to see Hendrix?
Yes, I saw Hendrix in Raleigh, North Carolina.
I have
spring of 1969.
I had a buddy who saw them at Vets Memorial, and Soft Machine opened the show.
Oh my, yeah.
And I can't remember what year that was. I don't know, but he saw him and he said said Soft Machine was incredible. And of course, Jimmy was absolutely stunning, of course.
Yes.
To see him, at Vets Memorial. I mean, of course, Vets is not what it used to be. They tore it down, but what a great venue to see Jimmy in.
Yeah.
Or Soft Machine,
Absolutely. Yep.
But yeah, he saw, who else did he see? He saw Cream, maybe at Vets. He saw, you've seen a lot of these acts, but when I hear people talk about it, I'm just in total awe, like I'm in total awe of you right now, because you've seen all these great acts. And you've also seen Zeppelin.
You needed to be born earlier.
Well, but to me, But if I talk to a lot of these younger kids now, and I go and say, "Yeah, my first concert." Okay, I saw my first concert. My folks would take me to see these shows. My very first concert was Foreigner with Ambrosia opening up on the double. It was Foreigner Double Vision tour, and they're playing St. John Arena.
Yeah.
And St. John, horrible acoustics. Oh my God. It just sounded like an echo chamber. But I was 13, totally into rock and roll. Whatever I could get, I was in. And so they took me to see my buddy and I to go see Foreigner, Double Vision tour. Then we saw Styx in same year in Athens for the Cornerstone tour. And I was just in, I think Michael Stanley Band opened up.
Oh, there you go.
Just all kinds of stuff.
Yep.
But man, I couldn't get enough of it.
And still can.
And I still can't. But you got
Tough.
to see Zeppelin too, right?
I saw Zeppelin a couple of times, and I saw them very, very early. Again, in Raleigh. It's in the book. I don't remember exactly what year that was. Whether that was this, well, I don't know what year it was.
It was early.
But it
Early
was early.
Zeppelin.
And again, my recollection of the show was it was not a sold out house. And, near the end of the show, the crowd rushed the stage. And we're all standing on chairs right up and just going crazy. The band was having a blast. And it looked to me like they ran out of material. They would huddle after each song and they started to do old rock and roll songs and stuff. It was interesting.
That must have been early
Yeah,
Zeppelin.
it was
Well,
early.
a lot of these bands that we look back now that are iconic, that are game changing. I mean, could you tell that there was something about Zeppelin then that might have changed the world to
You
I mean,
know, I don't really,
I guess you could open it up to any artist.
yeah, I don't really remember that reaction at the time. It was fun. It was interesting. They were loud. They were different. Jimmy Page played that weird box thing with the antenna and moved his hands around. And
Oh,
made I don't know what he called.
oh, you know what that is. Brian Wilson used it on Good Vibrations.
Right.
Brain problem.
So
I know.
it was, but
A theremin.
did I, walk out of there thinking this is changing the world, that it's opening the door to what would turn out to be heavy metal? That, yeah, probably not.
Yeah.
Probably.
It's just funny how things play out.
Yeah.
And this kind of leads up to another question. You meant there's talk about in your book. Like I said, I try to talk about bands that no one talks about. Like we do a one and done series on my channel where we'll look at, as a group, we'll go, hey, someone throw out a record that the artist only put out one record.
Yeah.
Let's look at it. We probably hadn't heard it, but we're just going to look at it. Hey, if we can turn some people onto it, maybe they want to check it out, get the discussion going. Great. Okay. So I like that. But you mentioned in the book, you mentioned a couple artists, that some of these artists, which were great, were critically acclaimed, like Kelly Willis, Chuck Prophet. You mentioned these artists, like Kelly Willis, because she was, let me think. I remember I had a girlfriend that had Kelly Willis on CD and thought she was incredible. Kelly Willis, what that would have been, what year was that? She came out what was her first record came out in what year?
Well, it's easier for me to remember the specific years of when I was in junior high and high school. I think Kelly's first record was probably around 1990 or 91. She was a nominee for the best new artist, CMA best new artist in let's say 92, where she was in competition with Faith Hill, and
Right.
I presume Faith Hill won that, although maybe neither of them did. Kelly did not. Yeah, I mean, I not only can talk about Kelly for a while, but I've got Kelly coming to Natalie's in mid-April.
Well, we can promote that while you're here if there's something you want to promote, because I'm going to get this episode up as soon as I can get it up. So if there is something you want to promote, feel free. But it's funny, there's just some of these artists, as incredible and as critically acclaimed as they are, they just can't get any momentum or traction to really make it over the edge. I guess there's only so many slots.
Well, what I say in the book is I don't like to get drawn into the conversation of why is this person a star and this person isn't.
There's no rhyme or reason.
there's no answer to that question. If there was, they'd figure it out and, do something about it. And so I try to avoid that discussion. But I do say, and you just mentioned the names, there's two exceptions to that. And I don't understand why Faith Hill is a star and Kelly Willis isn't.
At all.
And no disparagement to Faith Hill, or for that matter, my next one, certainly. I'm a huge Tom Petty fan.
Love Tom.
Why Tom Petty and not Chuck Prophet?
Or why not? Oh, he just passed away. Who I always thought was very Dwight Twilley. Great power pop, great records, but it never really took off. But for Tom Petty, because I always thought Dwight Twilley and Tom Petty were very similar.
Yeah, and Chuck gets comparisons to Tom, and I've got Chuck coming to Natalie's in June. That date is set up.
Excellent.
Although it's not announced yet. The tickets.
Oh, okay.
Kelly Willis tickets are on sale tomorrow.
There you go. Get yours today, ladies and gentlemen. But it's just funny why certain artists take off. Because if you look at Tom Petty on paper and you look at that first album, yeah, it's great. It's fine. But he really didn't take off until Damn the Torpedoes. But I could see with that record, though, Damn the Torpedoes, when I listen to it, it's a perfect record. It really is a great record.
Yeah.
And there's just something about it. Some of these people beat other artists to the punch, and I'm not saying they're in a competition or anything, but I just think it's funny how some of these bands just never took off. There's a band called Riggs that we're going to look at. They had a couple of songs on the heavy metal soundtrack, which Cheap Trick was on. A lot of artists were on there. Blue Oyster Cult, the whole bunch of people. But they had a couple of great songs on there, but they ended up putting an album out in 1982 that went absolutely nowhere.
Yeah.
And we're going to look at that, and it's really a good record that we're going to just try to turn people onto. But there's so many great records out there, Alec, that no one knows about. And I think they need a fair shake. Maybe we can turn some people on to stuff.
And I, like you, have always enjoyed, being on the cutting edge, being under the radar screen, whatever metaphor you want to use. It's always been fun for me to discover and then advocate for, musicians, artists that my friends don't know about. I've always had a blast making people prisoners in my house and making them listen to albums or CDs and turning people on to great music.
Yeah, I like it. It's fun. Gosh, we're almost an hour. I'd like to touch on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and how you became part of that.
Well, I was a corporate lawyer by trade, and got involved in law firm management and ended up being the co-executive partner of a big heritage Cleveland law firm, Baker Hostetler, on a national basis in 2004. By that time, I had already been promoting national act singer-songwriter shows in Columbus for about 9 years. And a woman that we hired in Cleveland to do the public relations to announce the leadership change at our firm, asked me what I did for fun. And I said, I chase kids around and I play a lot of tennis and I promote concerts, which of course caught her by surprise. She ended up talking to the people at the Rock Hall about me. And, I went up and met with them, and they asked if I wanted to come on the board. And I did. And I took it seriously, and I'm still there today.
And you've been to all the inductions, right?
I've been to every induction since 2005, except 2 years ago. I missed 2 years. I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, it's hard to contain this show into 1 hour. But you also mentioned, I think that's incredible because there's stories right there you could talk about for hours. The other thing is we did touch on this, how you have your own promotion company, Zeppelin Promotions. How did that come about? Did you always have like an interest in it? Were you at the right place at the right time? Did you feel that there was a need for something like this? Because you're still going strong. And like you said, we've got shows booked coming up at Natalie's, Kelly Willis is coming up. So how did that all come about? Because I'm just totally fascinated. Well, it was not nearly so thoughtful or informed as you might think. I always liked listening to music that was under the radar screen. I think I'm mixing up a metaphor there, but maybe not. Under the radar screen, and just stuff that people didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And I moved into that singer-songwriter world, what we now call Americana, alt country, excuse me, whatever it was at the time. And back in those days, now we're talking early 90s,
mm-hmm.
mid-90s. So many of those artists sold their records off mailing lists, hard mail, the old days, stuff that showed up in a mailbox. Excuse me. And I was a huge fan of a guy named Tom Russell. I had been listening to his records since the mid-80s. I was on his mailing list. And a mailer showed up that said, if you know, on the back of it, it said, if you know a place in your town that would be a venue that would be appropriate for Tom, call this number. And I'd never done anything like this. And it sat on my desk as a busy corporate lawyer for 6 weeks. And one day I called for no reason. I don't know what made me do it. Guy who answered the phone was promoting his shows at the time. And he said, you're not going to believe this, but Tom is leaving for a little Midwest tour in 2 weeks. He's got a night open between Pittsburgh and Detroit. See if you can find a place for him in Columbus. So I called every bar, including Stashes, that did live music and said, if you'll bring this guy in, I'll sell 20 tickets. And they all laughed. And I called back and left a message and said, I couldn't get it done, maybe next time. And the next day I was in our Cleveland office, and my secretary, knowing I was doing this, had me interrupted in a meeting and said, Alec, Tom Russell just called you. Well, for me, that was somewhere between Springsteen and Mick Jagger. And so I got out of the meeting. I called him at the time. He was living in New York. He said, I've got a night free, do something, anything, I got, any, and we talked for a while. He was a great guy, but I said, I can't do it. And I called home and got my wife on the phone. I said, I just talked to Tom Russell. And I told her the story, and she said, well, you've got to do that. And I said, really? So I knew a little place called the Columbus Music Hall, not there anymore, at the northeast corner of Parsons and Oak. And I'd been to a couple of shows there. And I called, and the woman who was running the place said it was open on, I think it was Thursday night, March 8th. I don't know what it was, 1995. And so I said, let's do it. So I rented the hall, and I didn't even print tickets. But Tom and Andy, his guitar player, Andrew Harden, came to town, and I got 99 people there on 8 days' notice.
Wow.
Every friend, family member, co-worker, client whose arm I could twist, I knew every person in the place. They put on a fabulous show. They personalized it, told lawyer jokes, made fun of me. They were just wonderful. We went out afterwards. We closed the old Flatiron bar on the north side of downtown. And, next morning I thought, this is too good. This is too much fun.
Yeah.
And this is my 30th year. Been doing it ever since.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's just, again, the stars aligned. You went, wow, maybe I really should be doing this.
Yeah,
but you kept your day job too, so that was a smart move.
I never quit the day job. I never did this to make any money. It was really just for
a passion.
And in the book I talk about how I built the artist roster, the referral from one artist to another, the criteria I applied to, and it got to a point, very quickly that it wasn't just all my friends and family. It was people who really loved music. And I was bringing stuff to town in those days that they didn't know. There was no other place to hear this kind of music unless you went to a Stashes, a bar scene, and that was probably the only one. And Dan had great taste, but it was a different kind of venue. This was a listening room environment. And I began to get people to come to the shows because they trusted me. They didn't know the music, but if I brought it, it was probably pretty good. And so, like I said, here I am 30 years later, doing the same thing.
Well, keep going, keep doing it.
Thank you.
But it's probably not like work, because passion. I mean, like doing these shows. I could do these shows all the time, because it's a passion. We're talking music. Hopefully we're changing some lives. I don't know.
I was doing this at the height of my career when I was so busy I couldn't see straight. I was working so hard.
Yeah, I don't know how you did it, because I was looking at, you were like working from dawn till dusk. At one point when you were like, probably when you were like earlier in your career, because there's one section in your book where you're making like mixtapes, and it's kind of like an outlet. Music, you said, was basically a distraction, or you said, what did you say? I wrote it down. More like therapy from working in law, that it was like an escape.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. And I didn't write the songs, but I could always find a songwriter who was writing a song that spoke not just to me but for me, yeah, very much. But I was so busy I couldn't see straight, and people would ask, "Well, how can you do this?"
Yeah, I'm
And
asking you that right now. How could you do it?
well, I always laughed and said I spent less time and money on it than most of my partners did playing golf. Um,
Good point.
it wasn't that hard. It really
No.
wasn't. I was booking the artist. I had at any point in time, I had one venue that I was using, and I sold tickets off a mailing list, now an email list. I never ran an ad. I still haven't. Um, so, I had it down a little bit to a little bit of a science.
Well, there is a science to it. So you've been going at it this long, something's working out.
Yep.
Well, Alec, we could go forever. There is so much more that I would bring up, but we try to keep these discussions to an hour.
Yep.
Maybe you'll come back. We can, I don't know, maybe pick a topic and discuss something.
If you let me know if you want to do it again sometime. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, just like you.
Hey, I'd like to have you back on the
enjoyed
show regularly. We could just have topics, and because you're such a wealth of information that I think everyone would just love it. But while we're here, and I'm promoting your book that came out several years ago, the book is Music in My Life, Notes from a Longtime Fan. I highly recommend you get it. I ordered mine off Amazon. They're still up there. Are these available anywhere else, Alec?
Well, if you're here in Central Ohio, Gramercy Books in Bexley stocks it, and you can get it there. But yes, it's available also online on any of the services, and Amazon in particular.
But it's such a good read, and
Well,
I'm just saying, everyone should read this. If you're a music fan, this book probably will change your life. It's a wonderful read. But yeah, I'd love to do something else or continue on talking more about stuff. But God, I know, but you've had quite a life, and I appreciate you spending time talking music with me tonight.
Well, I appreciate you having me. It's been a blast.
So before we go, is there anything else that you'd like to promote? We know we've got Kelly Willis coming in April.
Well,
Anything else coming up that we can tease the audience?
if you get on the Natalie's Grandview website,
Okay.
under their upcoming events, any of the shows that say Zeppelin Productions Presents are mine. And so next week we've got a young blues guitar hotshot named Gabe Stillman, a little bit out of my mainstream. It's almost sold out. And then on Sunday night, that's on Thursday, I've got Jorma Kaukonen, who has in fact become a wonderful friend, plays there at least once a year. It is deadlock sold out. Now, I do have a show in early March, and I should have been prepared for this. I think it's
That's
the 7th, but it's on their site with a guy named William Atheny. And this is not something I usually do. I usually only bring people to town if I've seen them live, or if another artist or somebody I really trust says, this is somebody you need to have. This is a young guy from West Virginia. I heard his music on Outlaw Country. I went and bought the album, blew me away. And I've got him coming to town. It's a stretch. People don't know him. And ticket sales are slow for that one.
Right.
He gets compared to Nick Lowe, Elvis Costello, Marshall Crenshaw. It's that kind of music, and he's really good. I've not seen him live, but he'll be there.
When's that show?
I think it's March 7th.
Well, I'll put the link down below so everybody can go check Natalie's site.
On the Natalie's site. And then Kelly is coming with 2 other women. They're calling themselves the Wonder Women of Country. And those tickets go on sale tomorrow, February 16. I'm not sure when this is.
I'm going to try to get this up tomorrow because this has been such a great.
And so I think that show's in April. And again, I don't have the dates ready.
That's okay. I'm going to put the link down below so people can check that out. If they're in Central Ohio, within Ohio, for crying out loud. So you can come check them out. A lot going on here in Columbus, ladies and gentlemen.
Absolutely.
And I think this year is going to be a big year, I think, for shows. Because I think things are really recovering from the pandemic at this point. Don't you think? Yeah.
Yes. Yep. The artists are out. The crowds are coming out. I think that, hopefully that's all behind us.
You mentioned Marshall Crenshaw, and I'm sold.
Oh, he's a good one.
Here we go. Here we go. Before we wrap it up, 1983, Songbird Center. Well, this was on the Field Day tour. 1983.
Okay.
Dig this. Opening act, Marshall Crenshaw. They had him right on the edge of the stage at the Songbird Center in Mansfield. The second band were the Tubes. The third band was Hall & Oates on 820 tour. It was an outdoor show at the Songbird Center. And I was a big, well, I still am. I absolutely love Marshall Crenshaw.
Yes.
One of my top 10 favorite. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And we drove because I was a kid, I was still living in Marion, Ohio. Then we drove, and I'd already seen Hall & Oates like a couple of times that tour, but Marshall Crenshaw, I'll never forget it. He hardly had any space on that stage, but I love Marshall Crenshaw, so I'm probably going to have to go see that show.
See William Matheny. Yep.
Yep. Sounds like a plan to me. But oh my God, it's right up my alley. Marshall Crenshaw. In fact, up here, there you go. Marshall Crenshaw promo poster. See?
Yep. That's I remember.
I love it. Well, Alec, I appreciate you coming on. I won't keep you any longer. What a great discussion. Again, check out the book.
Thank you.
Links are down below. And check out Natalie's website. I'll put the links down there below. I hope you have a great night, and hopefully we'll talk again.
I look forward to it.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.